Today on an all-new Dr. Phil, the dispute over gender pronouns.
I don't identify exclusively with being a man or a woman. I use they and them as my pronouns.
You don't get your own pronouns.
You think it's a delusion.
In school, our kids are being asked what their pronoun is.
This is a war on gender.
Babies are babies without a known sex.
When they were born, we did not assign a sex.
You think it's toxic to label the child one way or the other. Well, I have a question. Raise your hand if you have heard of gender pronouns such as he, she, or they, and Z or V. Raise your hand if you're confused about how to use them in today's social climate. Yeah. I'm asking these questions because approximately 1.2 million people in the U.S. identify as non-binary, meaning they don't identify as she or he, but they and other pronouns. Now, as society's attitudes about gender are continuously evolving, the practice of specifying one's pronouns is relatively new. Now, I just want to say, I don't have all the answers, not even close, but I'm totally open to learning, and I want this to be a safe place to talk about and learn. But not every person is on board with this new movement. Half of Americans say they feel very or somewhat comfortable using gender-neutral pronouns, while 48% say they feel very or somewhat uncomfortable using them. Now, this growing debate regarding the use of pronouns has this country pretty divided. Take a look.
Controversy tonight over a new policy on how gender identity is addressed.
You may notice it at the bottom of your emails or in Zoom meetings, the listing of pronouns next to someone's name.
When should you use the pronouns he, him, or she, hers? UCLA's Wilson Institute estimates just under 0.5% of us are non-binary, meaning neither male nor female, or identify with a gender not assigned at birth.
Point Park University in the middle of a national dispute over pronouns.
Point Park warned students if they use the wrong pronouns on a student, if an individual is impacted in a harmful way, action could be taken.
A kindergarten teacher is facing outrage after discussing gender identity with her students.
The kindergartners came home very confused about whether or not you can pick your gender, whether or not they really were a boy or a girl.
Many parents say they feel betrayed and blindsided.
I want her to hear from me as a parent what her gender identity means to her. My daughter went home crying, shaking, so afraid that she could turn into a boy.
Well, there's no denying it. Gender pronouns are a big topic of conversation that cannot and should not be ignored. And my first guests, Addison and Ethan, have a lot to say.
I'm Addison.
And I'm Ethan.
We've been together for about
5 years.
And married
for 3 years.
I use they, them pronouns. Being non-binary just means that I just don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and I don't identify exclusively with being a man or a woman. I'm something in between, outside of that binary.
My pronouns are he or they. I also identify as a non-binary. To me, being a non-binary means having the sense of freedom to explore my gender in whichever way I want. I don't have to perform or pretend to be someone I'm not. I can be my authentic self.
It's really important for us to share more information with people because people are curious, they want to understand, but sometimes they don't always have the opportunities to do that.
Welcome.
Hi.
You were watching the tape piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a hot topic.
Yes.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is it a good thing?
I guess because it creates dialogue and it invites conversation to learn about other people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are really confused about gender identity in these times, and it's good for us to have these conversations so people open their minds and relearn and unlearn to what we've been taught.
Right. And Addison, many people think gender pronouns are exclusive to the LGBTQ plus community, but that's a misconception, true?
Yeah. Well, everybody has pronouns. Like, you may use he and him as your pronouns, right? I use they and them as my pronouns. We all may have a certain gender pronoun too, but I think it's important for people to understand that for trans and non-binary people, we often change our pronouns to reflect who we are when we come out and be who we are.
How do you explain the difference between sex and gender?
I consider sex to be our biological makeup. Our chromosomes or hormones, our genitals is a biological makeup. But our gender is more of an internal sense. So think of it like this. Sex is what's between the legs, and gender is what's between the ears, right? It's how we see ourselves on the inside.
Okay. And that's something somebody can't know. Gender is something somebody can't know just by looking at somebody.
Nope, yeah. Because everyone is going to present and express themselves in a different way. I know, it's very confusing, right? Everyone's like, what is going on? But it's really, about us breaking that assumption that we can tell someone's identity, someone's story, their pronouns, even their name, just based on how they look, right?
Yeah. And so how does someone ask? How does somebody clarify that? Ethan, what's the best way? What's the most comfortable way?
I think for me, to create a safe space for people to share their pronouns, I will say, hi, my name is Ethan. I use he or they pronouns. What about you?
I think it's really important for us to recognize other people's pronouns because, again, we can't make that assumption. But for so many people who are cisgender, meaning that you do identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth, you're not transgender or not non-binary, I think a lot of people don't even question their pronouns because we already use them and it's already assumed correctly. Mm-hmm. But for so many trans and non-binary people, that isn't often assumed correctly. So we need to take the time to get to know people.
Cisgender, it says adjective that describes a person whose gender identity matches or aligns with the gender he or she was assigned at birth. Now, this would be what has been traditional for centuries, right? Mm-hmm. Why does it need a term?
If we don't use that term, then we end up saying maybe real men or normal men or regular men, right? Or we just say men, and then we say maybe transgender men, right? And the thing is that we need to realize that trans women are women, trans men are men too. And so we just want to have a term for that privilege, that assumption that your gender identity is going to match the one that you were assigned at birth.
All right, and then transgender, adjective, describes a person whose gender identity does not match or align with the gender they were assigned at birth. And then non-binary describes a person whose gender identity does not fit into the traditional binary of man or woman. And that term can be abbreviated to, and how do you pronounce that?
NB.
NB.
NB, yeah.
Okay, and explain that.
For transgender people, we are assigned a sex at birth. And when we grow up, when there's a mismatch of how we view ourselves and how society views us, then we can choose to, either medically transition or just socially transition or both. Not every transgender person chooses to medically transition. For me, I chose to medically transition to feel comfortable in my own skin.
Mm-hmm. And this is different from, being non-binary and stuff too, because for many non-binary people, they might identify as trans because they don't identify with that gender assigned at birth. Right. But for a lot of non-binary people, it means that you just don't exclusively identify as a man or woman. And under that, there's a whole umbrella of gender identities where people might have pronouns that change day to day. There might be people who have one set of pronouns for the rest of their life. You might have non-binary people too who are fluid with their gender identities in itself. It's very confusing, very nuanced, but I think that what you were talking about earlier with it being that maybe traditionally, for centuries, people have identified with maybe the gender that they were assigned at birth. When we look at history and we look at cultures too around the world, we see that third, fourth, fifth genders have always been around. And then in different cultures, the idea of what gender is or a relation to our bodies is completely different than maybe here in the United States.
I have a gender pronoun chart that I got really confused about, and I'm just admitting straight up, this chart, I didn't know how to use the chart, and we don't need to go through the whole thing, but there were like just using co.
Not all these pronouns I think I even recognize too, which is okay, right? I think at the end of the day too, people will have different pronouns beyond he or she or even they, which I use in a singular context for myself. But as you can see, there's an ongoing evolution of language and how people can identify. If you're unsure how to use someone's pronouns after that person has disclosed what their pronouns are, just ask, clarify. I just want to make sure that I'm using your pronouns in the correct way.
Do you know what XIE?
So you say Z.
Z, but then there is a Z right below.
There's different ways to spell and pronounce pronouns. It's complicated and nuanced, but it's important for us to understand that complexity.
My next guest has been criticized online for his views about gender identity. His reply may surprise you. That's next.
You don't get your own pronouns.
So you think it's a delusion if they decide that they're different than they were biologically created?
Yeah, I think it's delusion. It could be mental illness. My name is Matt Walsh, and I've written a book called Johnny the Walrus. This book is about identity and imagination. He identifies as a walrus, and his mom's a little silly. She takes it seriously and thinks he really is a walrus. So she went on her phone, and there are people telling her that this isn't pretend. He's really a walrus. And his mother takes him to the doctor to have him surgically transitioned and gets him walrus hormone pills, and then eventually tries to drop him off at a zoo to live with other walruses. Not only topping the Amazon charts, my book has taken the world by storm.
Well, you just saw my next guest, author and conservative host of Daily Wire's The Matt Walsh Show, talking about his recently published children's book that has since been removed online by a popular large retail chain. Now, Matt says gender is not a social construct, but rooted firmly in biology. True?
True, absolutely. Well, actually, just to clarify, and with all due respect, but most of what we just heard in the previous segment was total nonsense, which is why when you were pushing for definitions and that sort of thing, they were not able to provide it because it's just nonsensical. Sex, well, as human beings, we have a sex, male or female. That is a biological scientific fact. Now, gender is a linguistic term. Words have gender. People don't.
You're saying that there should be no construct of gender, just sex. You're either male or female.
Right.
And someone feeling in a mental, emotional way that they don't identify with the sex that they have been biologically created as and assigned at birth based on their genitalia. If they don't feel that way, that there's no construct that describes that, experiences that.
Well, that's got nothing to do with the reality. So you can feel however you want. I mean, I could sit here and say that I feel like a tomato plant, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually in those things. So your self-perception, you can have whatever self-perception you want, but you can't expect me to take part in that self-perception or to take part in this kind of charade, this theatrical production. You don't get your own pronouns, just like you don't get your own prepositions or your own adjectives. You know, it's like if I were to tell you, my adjectives are handsome and brilliant, and no matter whenever you're talking about me, you have to describe me as handsome and brilliant because that's how I identify. It makes no sense. You don't get your own pronouns. That's grammar. That's language.
So you think it's a delusion? Someone is self-delusional.
Yeah, I think it's delusion. It could be mental illness. It could be it's a lot of different things. With children, wow. You know, there's also just a basic confusion that all kids have. Like that's why when you hear a parent say, "Oh, my 4-year-old son came to me and said that I'm a girl now, and so that's what I'm gonna raise him as a girl." No, you're a 4-year-old. I have 4 kids. When a 4-year-old boy comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm a girl," here's a good follow-up question. What is a girl? Ask him what he means by that. What do you mean by girl? And when you ask him that, here's what he'll tell you. He will tell you what he really means is that he wants to do some of the things that girls do, like play with the dollhouse, or you know, he likes the color pink. That's fine. Play with the dollhouse, but you're still a boy. And that's a question I would like to throw out to other members of the panel. Actually, because just like the 4-year-old can't answer what is a girl, well, this is one of the problems with this left-wing gender ideology is that no one who espouses it can even tell you what these words mean. It's like, what is a woman? Well, can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I can't. Because it's not for me to say. Womanhood looks different for everybody.
What do you define a woman as?
An adult human female.
And what does a female mean?
Well, that's
how do you define a female?
Someone with female reproductive organs.
Okay.
Someone who's, here's the thing. When you're female, it goes right down to your bones, your DNA. So that's why if someone dies, we could dig up their bones 100 years from now. We have no idea what they believed in their head, but we can tell what sex they were because it's ingrained in every fiber of their being.
Interesting. So I'm trying to understand. Your definition is that a woman is someone who is female, you said, right?
Correct, is
Okay.
a biological female.
So what happens if we have maybe someone who is female, identifies as a woman, right? You know, cisgender woman, right? As you just explained, maybe doesn't have the ability to reproduce. Maybe doesn't have those organs that you're talking about that are reproductive organs.
I have answered the question. You stood up here and said trans women are women.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean. What is a woman?
Womanhood is something that, just as Ethan explained, I cannot define because I am not
But
myself.
you used the word, so what did you mean when you said trans women are women if you don't know what it means?
Right? So here's the thing. So I do not define what a woman is because I do not identify as a woman. Womanhood is something that is an umbrella term. It includes people
that describes what?
People who identify as a woman.
Identify as what?
As a woman.
What is that?
Was to each their own. Okay. Each woman, each man, each person is going to have a different relation with their own gender identity and define it differently. And so trans women are women too.
Okay.
And you want to hold on. You want to reduce.
You won't even tell me what the word means, though. So
you
that's
want to
the problem.
reduce women. You want to reduce men down to maybe just their genetics, our genitals, our chromosomes, right? That's what you're saying.
You want to do is
that's what
you want to do is appropriate women. You want to appropriate womanhood.
Okay.
And turn it into basically a costume that can be worn. We've got it's real funny. It's real funny. It's real funny when you're
should look like. Right. As a man, you're literally saying this is what a woman is.
Yeah. Well,
isn't that a little sexist?
Because I am willing to define it, but you won't.
Hang on. We've heard how Matt feels about pronouns, but my next guest says those who oppose them are asking the wrong questions. What does she say are the right ones? We'll add her to the conversation when we come back. Okay, thanks, brother.
You can laugh all you want, but this is a logical problem. You are conflating sex and gender.
There's biological sex, and then there is gender identity. Part of me wants to ask why you care so much.
Some people go by he, some people actually use the pronoun they.
I'm not a she. I'm not a he either. It's really about what sort of feels good to our ears when we hear it.
I refuse to use pronouns that do not apply to biological sex.
Pronouns are important because they indicate a degree of respect. You can avoid mistakes by just saying them, theirs, they.
If you're unsure about somebody's pronoun, ask, hey, what are your pronouns?
You cannot force people to call you what you want to be called.
Their gender is still valid regardless of whether or not you understand it.
Well, we've been talking about the great gender pronoun debate that has the country divided, just almost 50-50. Last segment, Matt made his case against people using what are called their own pronouns. But my next guest says the opposition is taking the wrong approach. Joining us on stage is Dr. Susie Denbo, Associate Professor at Kent State University with a PhD in Communications and expertise in gender, sex, and feminism. Now, Kent State has been recognized among the nation's most LGBTQ plus friendly universities. Now, doctors, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
You've been listening to everything that we've been talking about. So, Dr. Denbo, how do you feel those who oppose using pronouns are taking the wrong approach in this conversation?
I think there's the extreme approach that you are admittedly taking. And then there's also just ordinary people that might not be comfortable with the language change. And it just is awkward. And so they're afraid of not being courteous or being accepting. So there's these two things. There's actually combating and not being, you don't like transgender, the idea of transgender. That's different than pronouns. But then just for most people, it's just feeling a little bit awkward and unsure and not wanting to hurt or offend somebody.
Well, why is it important for educators to teach about gender identity, gender presentation, and pronouns? Why do you think that's important?
Because there is a difference. There is biological sex, and a lot of times people are conflating sex and gender. So there's biological sex, and then there's gender, and that's a social construct in the sense that just because you're born biologically a female doesn't mean you automatically want to vacuum, for instance, which is usually a feminine activity or conflated that way. And so it's this idea of giving children in age-appropriate ways an understanding that these things aren't set in stone. Gender identity is not tied to biology.
You say that gender's not set in stone.
It's not.
What do you mean?
I mean, that's just factually incorrect, saying that. So you have biology is the chromosomal makeup and reproductive organs and all of that. And so that would be sort of the nature side of things. But the nurture side of things is where we see more of gender identities.
She began by saying that my view is extreme. Okay, so the view that every single person on Earth has held up until 15 seconds ago is extreme. And the view that almost everyone does right now still hold is extreme, apparently, according to her. But there is this they are conflating gender and sex, because on one hand they say, well, you got your biological sex, but then your gender is whatever social construct. But then they turn around and say that trans women are women. So a man who identifies with the gender, the social construct of womanhood, actually is a woman. So if you can laugh all you want, but this is a logical problem. You are conflating sex and gender just by saying that. So that's the problem.
There's biological sex, and then there is gender identity. Part of me wants to ask why you care so much, because it's really not that big of a deal.
Can I answer that? I'd love to answer that question. I care about the truth. So basic truth matters. I want to live in a society where people care about the truth and we're grounded in truth. Right. I care about children, and these insane ideas about gender are being foisted on kids, and that bothers me quite a bit. I care about the women who are having their opportunities stolen from them. I care quite a bit, yeah.
You are a champion for women. I'm more interested in creating a productive space where we can try to build some kind of an acceptance around other people and exposing children to different ideas around gender identity. I don't think is a problematic thing with parents being involved.
My next guests are parents who say no way should children learn about gender pronouns at an early age. Not under their watch. They say if this is going to happen, it's the parents' job, not teachers. One pulled her kids out of school. We'll meet them after the break.
The entire gender pronoun situation makes me feel very upset.
I don't want a teacher talking to my child about gender pronouns. It is not appropriate. It's crossing a line.
I feel like I'm ambushed because now I'm explaining to my son. He asked me, what does sexist mean? As a parent, I felt trapped.
I had to pull both of my kids out of this school district.
A Loudoun County Public Schools teacher is suing the district. Tanner Cross is on administrative leave. He said he would not call a student who's transgender by their preferred pronoun.
And I will not affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa, because it's against my religion, it's lying to a child, it's abuse to a child.
Cross was placed on paid leave. Now he's suing the district.
Well, you just saw a news clip about a teacher in Virginia who was suspended after opposing the school's gender policy. Now, inclusion in schools is a major topic of conversation because parents and administrators, well, they just don't always see eye to eye. My next guests are two concerned parents with kids the same age. Now, they used to be in the same school district until one mom pulled her children out. So while they didn't know each other before, they have unified for the same cause.
I'm really concerned about what's going on in schoolrooms across the country.
The entire gender pronoun situation makes me feel very upset.
People may think that if you don't want to use the preferred pronouns, that you're against gay people. This is 100% untrue. I am a huge advocate for gay people, trans people, and the like.
Stacy and I both have children in the same school district.
I learned that the teachers in my children's school were asking for the kids' preferred pronouns in the classroom. When I heard about this, it was extremely upsetting.
Last year, my son was given a homework assignment. I gave an example of a child not identifying with the gender that they're born with. This is an example of the homework that was given to my 8-year-old son. If a student is unsure of their place in the gender spectrum, or is experimenting with different forms of gender presentation, school uniforms can present a real challenge.
Oh my gosh. What is gender spectrum?
That's a great question. My son was really confused. I feel like I'm ambushed because now I'm explaining to my son. He asked me, what does sexist mean? As a parent, I felt trapped. I felt I had to explain these concepts to my son. I felt like I was whittling away his innocence. This year, my 12-year-old daughter had a science teacher ask the class about their preferred gender pronouns.
I don't want a teacher talking to my child about gender pronouns. It is not appropriate. It's crossing a line. It's unacceptable. This is a parent-child issue, not a teacher-child issue. I wanted my kids to have nothing to do with it. I had to pull both of my kids out of this school district.
I've decided not to pull my children out of the school district, but I'm fighting for change. I've been attending school board meetings for about a year now. What's happening across the country is teachers could get fired if they use the wrong gender pronoun. That just seems wrong.
This is my mission in life, to protect my children, and however I need to do that, I will. What Matt and I and a group of us are doing is we're working to have the school board removed completely. A lot of people I know, a lot of parents I know, are afraid to speak up, and I speak for them, and I'm not afraid.
Stacey, Matt, why do y'all have an issue with the schools telling children about pronouns and having them deal with them?
First of all, thank you for having me. And I wanted to say I honor you and your journey and where you are in life. And it has nothing to do with that. We're here about our kids. And so in school, I feel like this is a family issue. It's a parent-child issue. And it's a real issue with some kids. I think that the percentage is quite small for how many kids go through this real serious issue. And including and imposing this on the entire school or the entire class is where I have a problem.
There's no reason an 8-year-old should be taking an assignment that says, what is the gender spectrum? And I had to explain to my 8-year-old son that they're about the gender spectrum and no longer about boys and girls, about femininity, feminine clothes, that uniforms could be sexist.
Well, let's look at your 8-year-old's homework assignment. It says uniforms may be sexist. Some uniforms may strike students and parents as sexist. For example, if a uniform requires girls to wear skirts and pants are not allowed, some students and parents may object, leading to conflict with the school's administration. Not all girls want to wear skirts, and some may resent being told to wear traditionally feminine garments. Also, if a student is unsure of their place on the gender spectrum or is experimenting with different forms of gender presentation, school uniforms can present a real challenge. Now, what was the assignment?
The assignment was whether school uniforms, pro or con, should schools have uniforms? And I believe they had that assignment just so they could squeeze this in. This was an agenda and not appropriate for 8-year-old children. When I drop my child off at school, I don't expect him to be indoctrinated. Why are we doing this? Shouldn't the schools be focused on science and education and learning and reading and writing? And instead they're being taught, are you a boy? Are you a girl? And they're confusing the children.
We're going to take a break. What these parents feel about gender-neutral locker rooms and bathrooms next.
Today is International Pronouns Day. It's a day designed to make personal pronouns more mainstream. Now we have a new pronoun, and it's they.
They. The Merriam-Webster dictionary revealed it is expanding the definition of the word they to refer to a, quote, single person whose gender identity is non-binary. The annual event aims to make respecting and educating people about personal pronouns commonplace.
International Pronouns Day makes everyone more comfortable having the conversation about what pronouns are and how that is in relation to their identity.
We've been talking about gender pronouns with all of our guests today. Stacey and Matt are two concerned parents with one shared mission, and that's to recall the local school board. They say their children were too young to be introduced to gender pronouns in elementary school. And they say if that conversation is going to be had, they'll have it. They don't want the teacher doing this. They don't want this taking place in school, that's something that they want to do with their children at the right time, if they have that curiosity. And you have an issue with gender-neutral restrooms.
Correct. This is a war on gender. Just like how Addison mentioned before with the pumpkin that in that picture it said no gender or gender's over.
Gender's over, yeah.
Gender's over. Well, I believe in gender. And to deny that there's a difference, to say gender's over is radical stuff that should not be taught to third graders. That's dangerous. And if you extrapolate and continue on, then it leads to to gender-neutral bathrooms, which they're doing at the school district next to us. And they're doing that throughout the country. And gender-neutral bathrooms and locker rooms and that's just not safe. That is a dangerous situation to keep them combined in the same space.
Yeah. How do you feel about the gender-neutral bathrooms and locker rooms?
Yeah, well, I agree with my fellow Matt over here. Loudoun County is a famous case that the Daily Wire we helped uncover. There was a gender non-conforming boy in a dress who went into a girl's restroom and violently raped a young girl. After that happened, that's when the school district decided, oh, you know what? Now we're going to open up the restrooms and invite the boys in with the girls. Now, here's what happens. Because we hear a lot about, well, gender nonconforming people, transgender people, it makes them feel bad if they're not given access to the bathrooms they want. Well, okay, so they have their feelings. What about the feelings of the girls who are getting raped? There are many girls and many women who are speaking out and saying, we want privacy in our facilities. We don't want a man in the bathroom with us. And then what we hear from this side,
I did not say that we want open bathrooms where anyone can go in.
What we hear from this side is that, well, their feelings don't matter. We're not going. Who cares? You just have to deal with it, right? Because the transgender people, the gender nonconforming people, it's their feelings that take priority.
I'm not trying to minimize your concern around it, but I don't know that it's a safety issue. You usually still have another bathroom that you can go to.
It's a security issue. My daughter would not feel safe or secure if she had to share a bathroom or a gender-neutral locker room with boys.
All right, normally on birth certificates, you have two choices, male and female. Well, not anymore. I'll explain when we come back.
Instead of a boy or a girl, gender-neutral babies are known as babies. Babies are babies without a known sex. They say the gender part comes later and is left up to the child.
We did not assign a sex at birth, which means when they were born, they had genitals and we know what they are. We just chose to acknowledge that those genitals don't indicate anything about gender.
Sparrow's parents decided to raise their baby gender neutral, meaning Sparrow will decide gender when older. Even Sparrow's birth certificate says sex unknown.
The term the media is used for this is not a baby, but a baby. Arlo, how old is the baby now?
Oh, Sparrow's actually going to be 4 in February.
Has Sparrow decided as...
Oh, a gender?
Yes.
Oh, that's a great question. Sparrow is in a point of learning and exploration with a lot of things, including gender. Language with children at 4 is very, they're figuring it out. And so currently, Sparrow uses he for everyone. No, it doesn't matter what their pronouns are, and we mentioned it. They just call everyone he, they don't conjugate it correctly. They don't use him or his or anything. Just he for everything. So we joke that he is Sparrow's preferred pronoun because that's what they use for everyone. As far as for themselves, though, they're not coming consistently saying, "I would like, I want to be a boy or a girl," or "I feel like I'm non-binary." We don't have heavy, in-depth, overt communications. It's not like every morning I wake them up and say, all right, what's your gender today? Hoping they'll finally give me an answer. So it doesn't come up like that.
Okay. You decided this was important to leave unspecified, undetermined. Why?
Because of the fact that gender is so social and it is such a social construct. Now, we say we shouldn't interact with one another differently because of our genders. Everyone deserves the same respect and treatment. But it has been scientifically proven that children are interacted with very differently based on whether they are assumed to be a boy or a girl. Girl children are held more, boy children are given, mechanical toys more often, all of these kind of examples and anecdotes. And I felt it was important for Sparrow to get the chance to figure themselves out without all of that pressure, intervention, and programming.
And if somebody asks you, do you have a child? And you say yes. And if they say, what do you have? What do you say?
When people ask, is a child a boy or a girl, oftentimes what they're trying to do is connect to you. And they're trying to connect to the child. So what I do is I give them some other bit of information about my child. Is your child a boy or a girl? They're 3.5. Is your child a boy or a girl? Well, actually, they just started preschool. I give something intimate and fun and special so that they know something about this child that is more relevant than what's in their pants.
So So you think it would be toxic to label the child one way or the other?
Potentially, yes.
All right, America may be divided on this great gender debate, but it's important to keep the dialogue open. And that's what I started out this whole episode with, is that I wanted us to have a safe place to be able to talk about this. I'm going to talk about some final thoughts when we come back. Well, I'm back with this group talking about gender pronouns. Now, Dr. Dembo, you say it's fine if people want gender roles, just don't project them onto others.
I was saying that in the context of, a marriage or a commitment like that. It's okay to have strict gender roles for a man and a woman if you find each other, because then it's going to work out real great. That relationship will. And then you find something that's non-conforming, and you find each other, and that works out great. And it's not a threat to the other person.
At the same time, too, I think that people should be allowed to have boundaries around who's in their space, too. And if you have people who are constantly putting you into a box that you do not identify with, if people are constantly seeing you in a way that you are not being seen and stuff, too, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting, right? You have to imagine that. So for us, if we don't hang out with certain people who don't understand us, that's okay. But we will try to keep an open conversation going.
Yeah, I would think you wouldn't seek those people out.
Right.
I wouldn't think you'd get up every day and go find Matt Walsh and spend, spend the day with him. But I would think he would be somebody that you would want to have an ongoing dialogue with because y'all disagree. And it seems like we should just keep the dialogue going and hopefully find some middle ground.
I have a question. Arlo, you mentioned that you don't have your child discussing pronouns or figuring out their pronouns yet. And yet in school, our kids are being asked what their pronoun is. I'm confused about how that works. And then there's always this fluidity right around what pronoun you are each day. So it's constantly changing. How confusing.
I think what it is. Oh, sorry. I think what it is that I sympathize with the hurt and distress that I sense from you all. I also wouldn't want my child to learn things from their teachers at school that were topics I was uncomfortable with or I didn't know how I'd want to talk about them. Your children are going to need to know how to navigate a world in which non-binary and transgender people exist.
This is a great conversation to have at home, out of the school. This should not be part of the curriculum.
We're out of time, but I thank everyone for your thoughts and ideas and for remaining civil about the conversation. Thank you so much, Arlo. And Dr. Denbo, thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. If you or someone you know are looking for support or information, there are resources available such as the Trevor Project, National Center for Transgender Equality, and World Professional Association for Transgender Health. While the issue of pronouns is divisive and can't be solved or fully covered, certainly in 1 hour, we hope an open dialogue between both sides can help foster better understanding and awareness wherever you come down on this. For more information about today's episode, log on to drphil.com. Thank you for being here. I'm sure we'll hear from you on this, and I want to hear your thoughts. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.